Welcome to the Deep Dive. We are so glad you're joining us today because we have got a really fascinating one for you.
Yeah, we really do. It's a pretty incredible data set we're looking at today.
Exactly. So for today's mission, we're unpacking a highly detailed, very academic 15-page slide deck. It's an assessment of American Samoa, and it's entirely based on decades of World Bank and UN data.
Right, and I should mention, looking at this presentation dossier, it's very minimalist. Lots of white backgrounds, very dense data, just flat trend arrows. It really lets the numbers speak for themselves.
It does. And what those numbers say is, well, it's a massive paradox. Imagine a place where, the population is just rapidly vanishing, like hollowing out.
Right.
And the economy regularly crashes by nearly 7% in a single year. Plus, they import hundreds of millions of dollars in goods while exporting practically nothing.
Yeah, if you just saw those specific macroeconomic indicators on a dashboard, you'd immediately predict a society in total catastrophic collapse.
Right. You'd picture crumbling infrastructure, failing schools, a government that's completely lost its grip.
That would be the textbook assumption, for sure. I mean, in almost any predictive model, a shrinking population combined with that kind of economic volatility, it's the absolute twin engines of societal decline.
And here's where the data from this slide deck completely shatters those models. On this exact same island, 90% of the land is covered in pristine rainforest.
It's wild.
It is. And youth literacy is virtually flawless. Perfect gender equality.
Right.
And the local government functions with a level of stability that, frankly, puts a lot of wealthy, highly developed nations to absolute shame.
It really is a remarkable puzzle. We're going to be looking at all this quantitative data today, everything from GDP indicators and carbon footprints to education parity.
So our goal for you today is to move beyond the flat statistics. We want to build a multidimensional understanding of how a territory doesn't just survive these impossible contradictions, but actually thrives.
Exactly. We need to figure out how they navigate this really critical historical crossroads.
Now, I want to play devil's advocate right out of the gate here, because I know you listening at home are probably already a little skeptical.
Oh, absolutely.
When you hear about an economy dropping by 7%, but somehow maintaining perfect literacy and near universal healthcare coverage, the natural thought is, wait, are these numbers real?
Yeah, are they cooking the books?
Right.
Yeah.
Are we looking at a statistical mirage here?
It's a totally valid suspicion, and it's exactly why it's so important that we are relying on audited multinational data sets for this. The World Bank and the UN do not just, take a local government's press release at face value.
They do their own homework.
They really do. They use rigorous methodologies, independent surveys, cross-referencing with federal oversight. Because remember, American Samoa is a U.S. territory.
Right.
So there's federal census tracking involved. The data on these slides is robust. It's not a mirage. It's just a highly complex reality.
Okay, so let's dive into that reality. Let's start with the executive summary slide here, which really lays out the four big modules: population, economy, society, and environment. And we have to start with population.
Because demographics really form the bedrock of any socioeconomic analysis.
Yeah, literally everything else we're going to explore, the volatility, the trade, the forest, it all directly flows from who is actually living on the island. And more importantly, who is leaving.
And the bedrock in American Samoa is undergoing a seismic shift. If you look at slide 3 in the deck, there's this really stark combination chart.
Right, that dark blue line graph showing the absolute population size. According to this, the total population peaked at just over 57,000, specifically 57,062 people.
But since that peak, it has been on a steady, undeniable, and honestly rather steep decline. It's dropped down to roughly 46,765 in recent years.
Which is just a staggering drop.
It is. To put that in context for you, a drop from 57,000 to under 47,000 is an almost 18% reduction in the total population. Imagine applying that to a major metropolis, like a city of 5 million people. That would be the equivalent of nearly 900,000 people just packing up their lives and leaving.
Just a massive hollowing out. And the rate of that change, if you look at the little gray bar chart below the main line, the population growth rate used to be booming. It was at a robust positive 3% per year.
Right, but that has dramatically flipped. The designer even circled the exact year it dipped below zero with a red dashed line.
Yeah, and an arrow pointing down saying the population is in continuous contraction. Recently, it's sitting anywhere from negative 1.6% to negative 2.3% annually.
And that flip from positive 3% to negative 2.3%, it tells a very specific story. It means the natural replacement rate, so births minus deaths, has completely stalled, or it's being entirely overwhelmed by outmigration.
People are leaving faster than new citizens are being born. And it's not just about the total head count, right? It's about the makeup of who is actually left behind.
Exactly. We have to look at the age structure. Slide 4 has this really clear 100% stacked area chart that visualizes the age demographic squeeze perfectly.
Yeah, they track what's called the old age dependency ratio. So the number of elderly people compared to the working age population, that ratio is basically doubled.
It really has.
It climbed from a very manageable 4.7% in the earlier data to a recent high of 12.3%. The chart even has an arrow pointing up at that 12.3% mark, highlighting the doubling of the aging burden.
Economists refer to this specific phenomenon as a proportionate squeeze. To understand it, you have to look at that middle band on the chart, the working age population, generally 15 to 64 years old.
The people who form the actual tax base.
Right. They work the jobs, start the businesses, consume the goods, and generate the public revenue.
They're the economic engine. But the youth are leaving. They're migrating to the U.S. mainland for college, or looking for diverse employment, or joining the military, which recruits super heavily in the territory.
Right, so that 15 to 64 demographic is shrinking rapidly. Meanwhile, the 65 and above group is staying put. And thanks to modern healthcare, they're living longer.
Let me use an analogy here for you to visualize this squeeze. Think of it like a crowded, bustling party. Suddenly, the doors open and all the young people start leaving for the city, leaving behind a smaller group of older guests.
I like that.
The entire dynamic of the room shifts. Or think of the society like a massive suspension bridge. The working-age youth are the steel cables holding it up, and the elderly are the heavy trucks parked on the bridge.
That's a great mechanical way to picture it.
Someone is removing those steel cables one by one while parking more and more trucks on the deck. The younger people who stay are forced to bear an immense, disproportionate load.
It's highly accurate. The tax base narrows significantly, but the social obligations, the healthcare, the pensions, community support, those widen. And this isn't a cyclical dip. It's a profound structural transformation.
Which raises an incredible tension. Because historically, when a society's primary demographic engine goes into reverse like this and the tax base collapses, the economy goes into a permanent deep freeze.
You end up with ghost towns, empty storefronts.
Exactly. So how is American Samoa handling this? If the workforce is shrinking that drastically, what is happening to the actual money?
Well, that brings us to the macroeconomic data. And frankly, the numbers here are incredibly volatile. They tell a story of extreme vulnerability.
Looking at slide 5, they have this waterfall chart of the gross domestic product, the GDP growth rate, and it is completely unstable.
It bounces around wildly.
The data shows extreme swings year to year. In a good year, the economy rebounds to a high of 4.4% growth, but in a bad year, it plunges into a deep recession. The chart has a gray circle marking an extreme drop of negative 6.9%.
We really need to pause on that negative 6.9% figure. Because in a standard macroeconomic context, a contraction of that size is absolutely catastrophic.
It sounds bad, but give us a global benchmark.
Okay, so during the depths of the 2008 global financial crisis, when banks were literally collapsing and millions were losing their homes, the United States GDP shrank by about 2.6% in 2009.
Oh, wow. So an almost 7% contraction is more than double the severity of the Great Recession.
Yes. It is a massive systemic shock to a local economy. It means a sudden, drastic loss of output, stalled production, tightened resources.
Wait, here is where I get completely tripped up by the data and where the paradox really starts.
Okay, lay it out.
If the overall economic pie is shrinking by nearly 7% in a bad year, you would expect the average person to be significantly poorer. But if you look at the dual-axis line chart on the very next slide, the GDP per capita, the average wealth per person has steadily climbed.
It's very counterintuitive visual.
Right. It moved from lower historical figures and recently crossed the $15,000 to $18,000 mark. How is that mathematically possible? If the economy is crashing, how is the average person looking wealthier on paper?
It's an excellent question, and the answer lies in a mathematical illusion. It's created entirely by the demographic shift we just discussed.
Okay, explain the math for us.
You have to look at how GDP per capita is calculated. It is a simple fraction. The numerator is the total economic output, the total wealth generated by the territory. The denominator is the total number of people living there.
Total money divided by total people.
Precisely. Now, if your denominator, the population, is shrinking faster than your numerator, the total wealth, the resulting number, will artificially rise. So even if the territory's overall economy takes a 7% hit, the fact that there are roughly 10,000 fewer people to divide that wealth among means the per capita figure goes up.
Wow.
The slice of the pie looks bigger, but only because so many people have left the table.
That is fascinating. So when a policymaker looks at that $18,000 per capita figure, they shouldn't mistake it for an economic boom. It's essentially a statistical side effect of the population drain.
It is. The chart has a call-out box that explicitly notes this is driven by inflation and population reduction. So while the nominal wealth looks positive, you should really view it as a glaring warning sign of structural fragility.
Let's talk about that fragility. I want to understand the mechanics of these wild swings. Why is their GDP swinging from positive 4% to negative 7% in the first place? A large economy doesn't bounce around like a rubber ball.
They don't, because large economies have internal diversification. In a massive economy like the US or Germany, you have thousands of different interlocking industries.
Right, if tech is down, agriculture might be up.
Exactly. It smooths out the overall GDP. But a small island territory does not have that luxury. Their economy is highly concentrated. It's essentially balanced on the head of a pin.
And what is the pin in American Samoa's case?
Primarily, it is the tuna canning industry and government employment. The Starkist tuna cannery there is one of the largest private employers on the island.
So if you have an economy that concentrated, a single external shock can be devastating.
Absolutely. A change in global tuna prices, a new international fishing regulation, a temporary closure of a cannery line, or a natural disaster like a cyclone, it can wipe out a huge percentage of their total economic output overnight.
Because they simply do not have the diversified internal industries to act as shock absorbers.
Not at all.
That makes total sense, and it leads perfectly into the next major piece of the puzzle, international trade. Because if you don't have internal industries, if you aren't making your own cars and building materials, you have to buy them from someone else.
You cannot survive in a vacuum.
And this is where the structural imbalance becomes truly extreme. Looking at slide 7, there's a back-to-back horizontal bar chart. And the visual asymmetry is just shocking.
The trade deficit is massive.
Let's look at the numbers. Their exports, the goods they actually produce and sell, mostly canned tuna, are historically very low. Depending on the year, it hovers from roughly $17 million to $88 million.
Yeah.
The bar on the left side of the chart is tiny.
Which, in the context of global macroeconomics, is a remarkably small footprint.
It's a drop in the ocean. But then you look at the right side of the chart. They're imports. The goods they bring in just to survive. The bar is incredibly long. They regularly hit hundreds of millions of dollars, occasionally nearing the $700 to $800 million mark.
They're importing nearly everything required to run modern society. Fuel for the power grids, building materials, vehicles, electronics, and a massive percentage of their food supply.
Okay, I have to stop you here and ask the most basic functional question.
Oh.
I'm looking at, let's say, $800 million going out to buy imports, and only maybe $88 million coming in from exports.
Right.
If this were a household, they would be bankrupt in a month. Imagine a family spending thousands of dollars a week on groceries, appliances, and cars. But their only source of income is selling a few glasses of lemonade from their front yard.
It's an unsustainable ledger.
How do they keep the lights on? What is the actual mechanism preventing this territory from total financial insolvency?
It's the crucial question, and the answer isn't found in the traditional import-export ledger. The deficit is bridged by two massive external financial pipelines.
Okay, what's the first one?
First, American Samoa is a U.S. territory. That means it receives substantial federal transfers. We are talking about tens of millions of dollars in federal grants, infrastructure funding, healthcare subsidies, and education funding flowing directly from D.C.
So the U.S. federal government is acting as the financial backstop.
Exactly. It operates almost like an external engine constantly pumping fuel into the local economy.
And the second pipeline.
Remittances. Remember all those young people we talked about earlier? The ones who left for the U.S. mainland or joined the military?
The ones who caused the proportionate squeeze.
Yes. They haven't completely severed ties. The Samoan cultural concept of fast Samoa, the traditional way of life, places a massive emphasis on extended family, or aiga, and communal obligation.
So they send money back.
Exactly. Those young people who left are sending a significant portion of their mainland salaries back home to support their elders and communities. So while the territory exports very few physical goods, it essentially exports its human capital. And in return, it imports capital in the form of remittances.
That is a fascinating economic mechanism. It's this closed-loop system of human export and capital import. but it still leaves them incredibly vulnerable, right? Because they are entirely at the mercy of factors outside their borders.
Absolutely. When you rely on $800 million in physical imports to survive, you are fully exposed to the turbulence of the global supply chain.
If shipping costs skyrocket, or there's inflation on the mainland.
American Samoa imports that inflation directly. They have no domestic manufacturing buffer. They can't just pivot and say, well, shipping is too expensive. Let's buy locally made trucks. There are no locally made trucks.
So let's summarize the narrative we've built so far. You're looking at a territory with a shrinking, aging demographic base. It has a highly concentrated economy that routinely suffers 7% recessions, and it has a massive trade deficit, leaving it exposed to global inflation.
Right.
If you feed those three variables into any standard sociological model, the output is grim. You would expect a society where the social safety nets have completely snapped.
You would expect failing schools, collapsed public health, widespread poverty. When a macroeconomy is that fragile, human capital usually degrades rapidly.
But the data shows the exact opposite. This is where the paradox truly takes flight. Let's look at the social foundation, specifically the education and health triumphs in this dossier. Because they are triumphs.
The social data is genuinely exceptional. It entirely defies the macroeconomic gravity we just described.
Let's look at slide 8, which has these two neat little semicircle ring charts. Despite the volatile economy, the adult literacy rate is an incredible 97.3%. And for the youth demographic ages 15 to 24, it's even higher at 97.6%.
And we absolutely must examine the demographic breakdown of that literacy because it reveals something profound about their institutional priorities.
Yes, the Gender Parity Index, or GPI, for youth literacy is exactly 1.0. There's a little checkmark icon next to it on the slide indicating perfect parity.
A 1.0 represents perfect statistical equality between young men and young women in terms of reading and writing access. Not 0.98, not 1.02, exactly 1.0.
Which is wild, because achieving a perfect 1.0 is incredibly difficult. Many highly developed wealthy nations still struggle with minor parity imbalances.
They absolutely do.
So I have to ask, how are they doing this? We established the economy is volatile and the tax base is shrinking. Why is a society under that much pressure achieving perfect gender parity in education? Is it just the U.S. federal funding?
The federal funding certainly plays a role. U.S. grants often come with strict Title IX requirements ensuring equal access, but funding alone doesn't guarantee outcomes.
Right.
We have plenty of data from resource-rich developing nations that receive massive aid but still have terrible literacy and deep gender imbalances because the funds are mismanaged or culturally resisted.
So it's not just the money.
No, it is the intersection of policy and culture. It goes back to Fifth Samoa. Traditional Samoan culture has clear hierarchical structures, yes, but it also has a deep communal emphasis on collective advancement. Historically, women in Samoan culture have held significant roles of respect and influence within the AIGA and the village councils. When you combine a cultural baseline that respects female participation with modern federal education standards, you get that 1.0 parity.
It's a deliberate, culturally ingrained commitment, and that commitment extends directly into their healthcare metrics, which are just as robust. Look at slide 9. The smooth line chart across decades shows life expectancy at birth has steadily lengthened.
It's moved from roughly 65 years to about 72.8 years recently.
Adding nearly 8 years to an average lifespan across an entire population is a monumental public health achievement. It doesn't happen by accident.
It requires systemic improvements in everything from infant mortality to chronic disease management.
And the specific data points on how they achieve that are incredible. Listen to this. 100% of births in American Samoa are attended by skilled health staff. Every single birth. Now, I have to push back here.
Go ahead.
How do you get 100% coverage on a rugged volcanic island in the middle of the Pacific?
It requires a highly centralized, heavily subsidized public health infrastructure. Unlike larger developing nations where rural populations are spread out, American Samoa's population is relatively concentrated. They have heavily invested federal and local funds into ensuring the main medical center and regional clinics are accessible. But more importantly, it shows that when the macroeconomy wobbles, when GDP drops 6%, they do not gut their healthcare funding.
They protect the core. And the sanitation data tells the same story. Slide 10 has this really stark waffle chart, 100 little squares. 99 of them are filled in dark blue, and only one is blank.
That's a very striking visual.
It tracks the rate of open defecation, which is at a microscopic 0.722%. which might sound like an odd, highly specific statistic to highlight, but from a public health perspective, it's vital, right?
It is a critical baseline metric used by the UN. Sanitation and maternal health are the two foundational pillars of a functioning public health system. If you cannot manage clean water and safe childbirth, nothing else matters.
Right.
The fact that open defecation is nearly non-existent proves they have built and maintained a highly resilient sanitation infrastructure, despite all their economic volatility.
So if we look at the big picture of this social data, what is the ultimate takeaway? Because it seems to completely contradict the idea that you need a booming economy to have a healthy, educated populace.
The takeaway is that wealth does not automatically equal health, and economic volatility does not have to equal societal collapse. What the data proves is the power of intentional human capital investment.
They made a decision.
Exactly. A long-term, unshakable decision to prioritize the health and education of their people above other metrics.
The people are the ultimate shock absorbers for the volatile economy.
Precisely. You can have a volatile GDP, a massive trade deficit, but if you have a highly educated, perfectly literate, healthy population, your society retains an incredible amount of resilience.
But usually, when a human population achieves high levels of modern health and near 100% literacy, it comes at a massive cost to the natural environment. We pave over the ancient forests to build hospitals. We burn coal to power the schools.
Human progress almost always leaves a deep, permanent scar on the land.
And this brings us to the fifth major section of our dossier, the environmental data. Because the paradox continues here. American Samoa has managed to decouple its human development from environmental destruction.
The numbers here are almost unbelievable. We are talking about the physical health of the island itself.
Slide 11 has a huge rectangular tree map showing land use, and the vast majority of it is colored deep green. The data shows forest cover is consistently maintained between 85% and 90% of the total land area.
Think about what that physically looks like. 9 out of every 10 square miles of land is covered in deep, intricate, tropical forest ecosystems.
You are basically looking at a massive, pristine national park that just happens to have a highly literate human society living on the edges of it.
It's truly unique.
And because they haven't clear-cut the island to build sprawling industrial parks, their carbon footprint is practically a rounding error. Slide 12 has a bar chart that highlights this. Per capita CO2 emissions are an astonishingly low 0.002 tons of CO2 equivalent per person.
To properly contextualize that 0.0002 tons for you, the average person living in a heavily industrialized global north nation might emit anywhere from 10 to 15 tons of CO2 per year.
Wow.
So American Samoa's emissions aren't just low, they are microscopic.
While the rest of the world is desperately trying to reduce their carbon footprints, spending billions on green tech, American Samoa barely has a footprint at all. But I want to connect the dots here. How do they maintain a modern lifestyle with cars and electronics with practically zero emissions?
This is where the entire dossier starts to interlock. You have to trace this environmental data straight back to the trade deficit we analyze in Section 3.
The $800 million in imports.
Precisely. The ultra-low carbon footprint is intrinsically tied to that massive trade imbalance. They only emit 0.002 tons because they have almost zero heavy polluting industrialization on the island.
No steel mills, no chemical plants.
Right. They don't have sprawling industrial agriculture clearing the forests.
Because they just import all the finished steel, the chemicals, and the agricultural products from the U.S. mainland or Asia.
Exactly. By importing the vast majority of their finished consumer goods, they are effectively outsourcing their industrial emissions.
Oh, wow.
The factories that burn the coal to make their cars are located in China or South Korea or the U.S. The carbon is emitted into the global atmosphere, but it is counted on someone else's national ledger.
That is a brilliant point. It's an accounting reality.
Yeah.
But even if the carbon emissions are outsourced, the physical reality on the island remains unchanged. By not industrializing their own landmass, they have managed to preserve something incredibly rare.
Environmental economists refer to it as irreplaceable natural capital. We shouldn't just view that 90% forest cover as pretty scenery for tourists. We need to view it as a hard economic and ecological asset.
Explain that concept a bit more. How is a forest an asset if you aren't chopping it down and selling the timber?
Consider the era we are entering globally. We are facing unprecedented climate crises, rising sea levels, massive biodiversity collapse. In that context, an intact ancient rainforest is an immense, globally significant asset.
Because of what it provides locally.
Locally, those deep root systems act as a vital ecological barrier. They prevent the steep volcanic slopes from eroding into the sea, they filter the fresh water, they protect coastal infrastructure from storm surges.
And globally, they act as a carbon sink.
Precisely. While massive, wealthy nations are spending billions trying to reforest degraded land, American Samoa already holds the gold standard of ecological preservation. They are sitting on a fortress of natural capital.
So if we pull back and look at the entire dashboard we've built, we have an island with a shrinking, aging demographic base, an economy that swings from boom to 7% busts, a massive reliance on external funding and imports.
Right.
Yet simultaneously, we have 97% youth literacy, perfect gender parity, rising life expectancies, 100% skilled birth attendance, and 90% pristine forest. How is all of this actually managed? What is the anchor keeping this society from tearing itself apart?
To find that anchor, we have to look at the final piece of the dossier, the governance data, because these kinds of outcomes do not happen by accident.
It all comes down to the people running the system, writing the laws, managing the money. Slide 13 has this dot plot showing the World Bank governance indicators, and they are shockingly strong.
They are exceptional, and they require a deep dive to truly appreciate.
Let's look at the rule of law estimates first. The World Bank uses a standard global scale that roughly runs from negative 2.5, which would be total anarchy or a failed state, up to positive 2.5, which is the absolute peak of transparent governance.
Like Denmark or Norway.
Exactly. On that scale, American Samoa scores between 1.1 and 1.4 for rule of law.
To place that in context for you, a score between 1.1 and 1.4 puts them in a very high percentile globally. It means that citizens and businesses have a deep ingrained confidence in the rules of society. Property rights are respected, courts are legitimate, laws are enforced predictably.
And it gets even better when you look at corruption. Their control of corruption score is equally excellent, ranging from 1.2 to 1.7 on that same scale.
A 1.7 in control of corruption is an outstanding metric. It indicates that public power is rarely exercised for private gain. The state is not captured by elites.
Slide 14 has a dual line chart that shows government effectiveness has steadily climbed to 0.65, and their political stability is an absolute rock, holding constant between 0.9 and 1.1.
These are governance numbers that many larger, fully independent developing nations strive for decades to achieve and frequently fail.
So I have to ask the cynical question here, because I think a lot of people assume that governing a tiny island is just inherently easier. If your total population is under 50,000 people, isn't it just harder to be corrupt because your neighbor will inevitably find out?
That's a very common myth.
Does their success just boil down to being small? Or are they doing something fundamentally different that larger nations should copy?
We have to carefully and firmly refute that small island myth. If you look at global data, many small island territories and microstates actually struggle deeply with systemic corruption, extreme nepotism, and political instability.
Wait, really? Why?
Precisely because of those tight insular networks. In many small jurisdictions, it is incredibly easy for a small group of wealthy families or political elites to completely capture the state's resources, dole out contracts to their friends, and freeze everyone else out.
Because everyone knows and everyone's easier to rig the game. Smallness breeds state capture.
Exactly. So American Samoa's clean governance isn't just a natural byproduct of being small. It represents an active, hard-won institutional dividend. It requires a fierce cultural and legal commitment to transparency.
And how does that actually function locally?
Well, in American Samoa, you have a unique hybrid system. You have the traditional Matai system, the chiefly system at the village level. This demands intense local accountability and communal consensus. If a leader acts against the community, the Aiga will hold them accountable.
Right.
And layered over that traditional system, you have the stringent legal frameworks, audits, and federal oversight of the United States.
It's the synthesis of traditional communal accountability and modern federal law.
Precisely. And this brings us to the ultimate synthesis of our entire deep dive today.
Let's tie all these threads together.
We asked at the very beginning how this society manages to survive the demographic contraction. We asked how they survive the wild macroeconomic roller coaster and the structural imbalance of an $800 million trade deficit.
And how they maintain the literacy in the forests through all of that pressure.
The answer is the governance. It's the anchor. It is precisely because of this clean, efficient, and stable legal and political environment.
Because it controls the money.
Exactly. Think about how the money flows. When federal grants or remittance dollars enter the territory, the strong rule of law ensures that those resources aren't siphoned off into the offshore bank accounts of corrupt politicians.
They actually make it to the ground. They are deployed to the public schools to maintain that 1.0 gender parity. They are deployed to the clinics for the 100% skilled birth attendants.
Yes. Furthermore, the high political stability provides the local government with the long-term vision required to protect their natural capital.
Because a corrupt government would likely log those ancient forests and sell the timber to foreign corporations just for a quick cash infusion to fix a short-term trade deficit.
Exactly. But because they have a stable long-term view, they protect the 90% forest cover. The governance is literally the glue holding the entire paradox together.
It transforms economic vulnerability from a fatal flaw into a manageable condition. That is an incredible journey through the data.
It really is.
When we started this deep dive, American Samoa might have just seemed like a tiny dot on a map with a few statistical quirks. But looking at all these pieces interlocking, it is a highly complex, highly functional society.
They've built a remarkably resilient social fabric.
They are definitively proving that you can face severe headwinds of an aging, shrinking population and economic concentration. But if you relentlessly prioritize your human capital and fiercely protect your natural capital and anchor it all with transparent political stability, a society can thrive against all odds.
They can. However, we have to look to the horizon, as slide 15 points out with its policy recommendations logic tree. Moving forward, they face existential challenges. The outmigration of the youth isn't stopping.
Right.
To secure their future, the territory must figure out how to leverage its incredibly high human capital and strong rule of law to attract high-quality, sustainable economic investments.
So how do they fix the $800 million trade deficit without industrializing and ruining the forests?
That is the exact policy needle they must thread. They need a structural economic pivot. With a 97% literate, bilingual population and strong legal protections, they are perfectly positioned to become a hub for digital services, remote knowledge work, or high-end, low-impact ecotourism.
They need to export knowledge and experiences rather than physical resources.
That is how a modern island economy balances its trade deficit without sacrificing its pristine environment.
It's a massive challenge, but the data proves they have the institutional foundation to pull it off. I want to leave you, the listener, with a new angle to ponder as we wrap up.
This is a good one.
We spent this entire deep dive looking at how American Samoa is managing its own internal transition. But zoom out for a second. Consider the massive economies of the global north: the US, Europe, Japan, South Korea.
Over the next 30 years, these giant nations are facing their own massive demographic collapses, shrinking workforces, and unprecedented aging population crises.
They are about to face the exact same proportionate squeeze that American Samoa is already navigating.
It's a provocative thought. If the entire industrialized world is about to experience this severe demographic contraction, perhaps the global north shouldn't be looking to traditional economic models for answers.
Exactly. Perhaps they should be looking to the Pacific. Might the highly stable, deeply human-centric model of this tiny island territory actually be the exact blueprint the rest of the world needs to survive the next century?
Something for you to mull over.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the statistics behind the headlines, remember to look for the hidden mechanisms, and always keep in mind that sometimes the most broken-looking dashboards are actually pointing the way forward. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.